The last thing I remember before slipping under was the smell of gardenias. Funny, isn't it? Not the hospital bleach or the hum of machines, but that sweet, ghostly perfume that reminded me of summer weddings and the corsages I wore to church on Easter Sundays. David had brought them in one of those little glass vases from the dollar store, wrapped in tissue like he'd plucked them from someone's backyard. Thought you'd like these, Ma, he said, setting them on my nightstand with the kind of awkward affection adult sons give their aging mothers when they're not quite sure what to do with them anymore. You didn't have to, I whispered. I remember his hand on mine, warm, strong, my boy who used to be so small, clinging to my apron while I stirred the soup. Get some rest, he said. You need it. And then nothing. They told me later it was a stroke. I was found on the back porch in my nightgown, one slipper halfway off, the newspaper still in my lap. The neighbor, old Mrs. Hendricks, said she saw me just sit back and close my eyes like I was taking a nap. Only I didn't wake up. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a different room. There were tubes in my arms, my lips were chapped, and every breath felt like swallowing gravel. A nurse with tired eyes leaned over me and smiled. Welcome back, Miss Duval. How long? I rasped. 6 weeks. 6 weeks. 42 days of nothingness. 6 Sundays gone. I missed the gardenia bloom, missed my birthday, missed everything. And David? He wasn't there. Not beside me, not in the hallway, not even in the parking lot. He came by early on, the nurse said when I asked. But we haven't seen him in a few weeks. Left a number. They handed me a sticky note with his cell scribbled in green ink. I clutched it like a life raft. But when I called, it went to voicemail. I left a message. Just my name. It's Mom, I said. I'm awake. I never heard back. 3 days later, they moved me to a rehab center, linoleum floors, faded floral curtains, and the faint smell of bleach and resignation. I was still learning how to hold a fork again when a woman from social services showed up with a folder and a frown. We're reviewing your transition plan, she said. Your son has handled the sale of your home. I blinked. I'm sorry. Your property. It's been sold. Proceeds transferred into a managed care account. David completed the documentation for power of attorney. Everything's been approved. My house, I said, louder than I meant to. My house has been sold. It's standard when family manages care. Many clients do this. It's all above board. Board. Legal. Official. But not right. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. That house wasn't just where I lived. It was my entire story. The pantry door David once drew on with a crayon. The rosebush out front I planted after my husband died. The corner of the kitchen where the linoleum bubbled up and we never had the heart or the money to fix it. Gone. Just like that. I asked to see the records. They handed me a list of assets liquidated. Furniture, art, household items, jewelry, family photos scanned and destroyed. All cataloged and numbered. My breath came in short, wheezing gasps. David had cleaned me out. While I lay in a coma, he picked through my life like a vulture, deciding what was worth keeping, what could be sold, and what could be thrown away. I called again. Left another message. Why, David? Why would you do this? No reply. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay under a wool blanket that smelled of bleach, staring at the water stain on the ceiling. I kept seeing my house, empty, stripped bare. I imagined him walking from room to room, deciding what to sell, what memories were marketable, what love could be boxed and listed on Craigslist. The next morning, the nurse brought me a small cardboard box. This was left for you, she said. Inside was a photograph. My living room, gutted. The walls bare. The rug gone. My wedding photo gone. My knitting basket gone. Only one thing remained in the center of the room. My recliner. The one I rocked David in when he had colic. The one where I read to him every night. The one thing he didn't sell. And somehow that made it worse. Rehab is a place where time moves differently. Days stretch long and quiet, interrupted only by the clatter of walkers and the hum of television game shows echoing from the common room. But for me, it was the silence that hurt the most, the silence from my own son. I thought maybe he was waiting for the right moment to explain, to apologize, to face me. So I waited too. But the phone never rang. One morning, during my occupational therapy, I asked the nurse if she could look up David's address. She hesitated. I just want to send him a letter, I said. She nodded, made a note. That night, they handed me a printout. He'd moved. Not just neighborhoods, cities. Gone from Greenville to Atlanta. A sleek apartment listed under his name. No mention of me on the emergency contact form. I should have known then that I was no longer part of his life. Not really. Just a signature he'd needed to clear the path. Still, I wrote the letter. Dear David, I'm awake. I'm healing. I miss you. I don't understand what happened, but I'd like to. I need to. Love. Mom. I sealed it, stamped it, handed it to the front desk. Then I waited another week. Nothing. On the 10th day, a box arrived from a forwarding address in Georgia. It had no return label. Just my name, printed in a typeface that made my heart sink, cold, impersonal. Inside was a manila folder. Receipts, final sale notices, shipping labels, and at the very bottom, a letter. Typed. Mom, I did what I had to do. The doctors weren't optimistic. The cost of your care was rising. The house needed too many repairs, and we couldn't keep it. I took care of things. You don't need to worry anymore. David, no love. No, I'm glad you're okay. Just that. Took care of things. I read that line a dozen times. The boy I raised with bedtime stories and grilled cheese sandwiches, the one who used to draw hearts in my birthday cards, had reduced me to an inconvenience. Something to take care of. That night, I didn't cry. I packed the folder away in a drawer and asked to be taken outside. The nurse wheeled me to a small patio where an old crepe myrtle leaned crookedly over a rusted bench. I sat there under its purple bloom and breathed. The air was warm, humid, full of memory. I thought of the first time David rode a bike without training wheels, how he fell and scraped his knee, then got up and rode again, screaming, "Look, Mom, I'm doing it." And now he couldn't even look me in the eye. The next morning, I asked about my finances. The social worker looked confused. David submitted everything. There's an account under your name for medical expenses only. What about my other savings? My pension? She frowned. There's nothing else listed, ma'am. All funds were transferred to the managed trust. He took it all. Gone were the savings bonds, Harold, and I tucked away for rainy days. Gone was the pension I rolled over when I retired from the school library. Gone was the little inheritance my sister left me. All of it liquidated. I felt like I was unraveling from the inside. Not from the coma, not from the stroke, but from the betrayal. Every breath felt heavier than the last. Every sound too loud. Every face unfamiliar. And then came the night. The nurse found me on the floor, collapsed beside the bed. Blood pressure drop. Fainting spell. They admitted me again, this time to a smaller room. No windows, just a flickering light in the hallway. When I opened my eyes, all I saw was beige. Beige walls, beige sheets, beige silence. That was when I knew I had to leave. Not just the facility, but the life David had built without me in it. I didn't have a plan at first, just a feeling. A hum in my bones that told me I couldn't stay in that beige room, that I couldn't let my story end with a whisper and a hospital bracelet. So I began to ask questions, small ones at first, about policies, about bank transfers, about power of attorney. That's when I learned that David had filed for permanent guardianship. Not just temporary, permanent. He hadn't expected me to wake up. That realization sat in my chest like a lead weight. My own son had planned a life without me in it. There was a woman on staff at the rehab facility, Mrs. Keene, a case manager with kind eyes and a no-nonsense haircut. One day after physical therapy, I asked her, "Do you know a good lawyer? The kind that works with women like me." She didn't hesitate. "I know just the one." His name was Harris R. Bellamy. He wore a gray suit that looked 2 decades old and carried a briefcase covered in stickers from every coffee shop between here and Asheville. When he came into my room, he didn't offer platitudes. He just pulled out a pad of paper and said, "Tell me everything." And I did. About the coma, the house, the sale of my things, the account transfers, the letter. The way David had wiped me out erased me from the life I built with my own hands. When I finished, Harris let out a long whistle. Well, he said, adjusting his glasses, that's one hell of a betrayal. But it's also potentially illegal. My heart skipped. You mean I could fight this? He nodded. You were under temporary medical care, not declared permanently incapacitated. Unless there's a court order, which I'll check, he couldn't make those sales without full guardianship. And if you never signed over certain rights, we may have a case. I sat very still. Can you help me? I asked. I can try, he said. And if we're lucky, I can get you more than just answers. I can get you justice. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to wake me up inside. We began slowly. He requested documents, financial records, court files. We combed through David's filings, found inconsistencies, signatures that didn't match mine, dates that didn't line up. He'd gotten sloppy, assumed I wouldn't be around to notice. Then Harris looked up from his notes one day and said, Did you know your house sold under market value? What? It was appraised at $235,000. David sold it for $160,000, fast cash sale to a company in Atlanta. They flipped it within 2 months for $280,000. I stared at him. So he made a profit? No, Harris said. The buyer did. David just wanted it gone fast. Which tells me he wasn't just trying to pay bills. He was trying to move on. The betrayal deepened. But with Harris's help, I filed a motion. It was the start of something, a ripple in the still water. I wasn't powerless anymore. On the day of the court hearing, Harris wheeled me in himself. I wore the nicest blouse I had, combed my hair, put on lipstick. I looked like a woman who still had fight in her. David showed up late. He looked surprised to see me sitting upright, alert, with fire in my eyes. Mom, he said, hesitant. I said nothing. Let the court see, I thought. Let them see what you did. The courtroom wasn't anything like on TV. No drama, no gavel slams, just the low hum of ceiling fans and the shuffle of papers. But to me, it might as well have been the final battlefield in a long, lonely war. David sat 2 rows ahead, flanked by a young attorney in too tight shoes and too much cologne. He wouldn't look at me, not really. He kept shifting, whispering, glancing down at his phone like it might rescue him from the truth about to unravel. When the judge asked me to speak, I stood slowly, knees creaking but voice steady. My name is Evelyn Duval, I said. I'm 71 years old. I raised a boy who used to cry when he skinned his knee, who made me Mother's Day cards out of cereal boxes and glue. That boy would never have done what this man did. There was a pause. Even David stilled. I went into the hospital weak, but I wasn't gone. I wasn't dead. I wasn't disposable. But while I was unconscious, my son sold everything I owned. My home, my furniture, my memories. He emptied my accounts. He filed for permanent control. And he never even asked if I wanted to live. I looked directly at David then. You didn't wait, David. You didn't hope. You cleared me out like clutter. There was silence in the room. When I sat down, Harris squeezed my shoulder. David's attorney tried to argue duress, stress, rising medical costs. He painted a picture of a desperate son making hard choices. But the judge didn't buy it. I see no documentation justifying permanent guardianship, he said. And the power of attorney was not valid after her recovery. The sales were unauthorized. We're reversing the financial control and opening an investigation into the property transfer. David slumped, just slightly, like someone had let the air out of him. It wasn't over, but it was something. Afterward, outside on the courthouse steps, David finally spoke. You don't understand, he said. I thought you were gone. I was scared. I was trying to protect myself. I stared at him. My son, the boy I had fed, clothed, loved with everything I had. Now a man I didn't recognize. No, I said softly. You were trying to erase me. He didn't respond. Just looked away, like the truth burned too bright. That night, back in my small rehab room, I looked in the mirror for the first time in weeks. Really looked. My hair had thinned, my skin sagged, my body weaker than before. But my eyes? They were alive. Alive and angry. Alive and awake. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to rebuild. Not because I needed to prove anything to David, but because I finally remembered who I was before I became someone else's mother, someone else's burden. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I was discharged from the rehab center. Not home, though, because I didn't have one. I moved into a small rental cottage arranged by a local women's shelter Harris had worked with. It wasn't much, 2 rooms and a stove that clicked before it lit, but it was mine. Mine. The first night there, I walked barefoot across the creaky hardwood and cried for the first time since I woke up. Not out of sorrow, but relief. No monitors. No strangers. No beige walls. Just me and the quiet. Harris came by the next morning with good news. "We got a hold on what's left of your account," he said, setting a folder on my table. "The court froze it, and the bank flagged some of David's transfers. There's a chance we can recover part of what he took." It wasn't everything, but it was a start. That afternoon, I asked him if we could drive by the old house. He hesitated. "You sure?" I nodded. We didn't stop, just circled the block. The new owners had already painted the shutters a bright blue, and the yard was trimmed within an inch of its life. But there, on the edge of the driveway, sat the attic box. My old cedar chest. Scratched, dented, but unmistakably mine. I told Harris to pull over. It took some convincing, but the new owners, a young couple who had no idea they were standing on the ashes of someone else's life, let me have it. "It was in the garage when we moved in," the woman said. "Didn't know what to do with it. I took it like it was treasure. Back at the cottage, I set it gently on the floor and opened the lid. Inside, photos, letters, a bundle of recipes in my mother's handwriting, a hand-drawn Mother's Day card from David, age 7. "I love you more than chocolate," it read. That hit me harder than any court loss. Buried beneath the papers was a small jewelry box, my wedding ring, still there. The one David hadn't bothered to find. There was also a letter from Harold, my late husband, one I'd forgotten existed. If you're reading this, it began in his familiar, looping script, "I'm already gone." But I want you to know, you were always the strong one, Evelyn. If life ever tries to fold you in half, stand up anyway. They'll never see it coming. I wept. That night, I slept with the cedar chest at the foot of my bed like a guard dog. And in my dreams, Harold stood beside me, not saying a word, just nodding. I hadn't spoken to David since the court date, and he hadn't reached out. Part of me was grateful for the space to breathe, to piece myself back together. But part of me, the stubborn mother in me, still wanted to believe he would call, that he would come to his senses. He didn't. So I wrote him a letter, not to accuse or shame or beg, just to speak. "Dear David, there's no guidebook for what we've been through. I've been angry. I've been hurt in ways I didn't know I could be. But I've also remembered something important, who I am. And who I am is not disposable. You may not understand what you took from me when you emptied that house, but I do. You didn't just sell furniture. You sold stories. You sold the chair your father rocked you in, the quilt your grandmother made, the photograph from my first day of work. You sold parts of me you never asked to know. And maybe that says more than anything. But here's what you didn't take, my will, my memory, my strength. I'm still here, David, and I will not disappear quietly. Your mother, always, Evelyn. I didn't send it. Not right away. I folded it neatly and placed it inside the cedar chest. That letter wasn't for him. Not yet. It was for me, a line drawn in the sand. Instead, I turned my attention to rebuilding. Harris helped me apply for social services. A friend from the church I used to attend brought groceries. And then one morning I got a call. "Ms. Duval, this is Stephanie from Lark and Finch Community Center. We reviewed your application. We'd love for you to come by for a conversation." I had applied to be a literacy volunteer, teaching adults to read. It felt small at first, like tossing a pebble in an ocean. But when I stepped into that center with its mismatched chairs and chipped mugs and people who smiled like they meant it, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Belonging. My first student was a woman named Marisol, 55 years old. Couldn't read past the 3rd grade level. The first time she spelled her name without help, she clapped her hands and cried. So did I. That night, I sat at my little kitchen table and wrote in my journal, I am building again. Not a house, a life. The house David sold may have been my past. But this tiny rented cottage, these evenings with my tea and my books and my worn slippers, this was mine now. And it was mine. 3 months had passed since I'd returned to the world, and in that time the quiet had become familiar, not unwelcome, but not quite peace either. The hardest part wasn't what David had done. It was what he hadn't done. He hadn't said he was sorry. I'd begun to accept that I might never hear it. One Sunday afternoon, I took the bus to the edge of town and walked the last few blocks to the cemetery. Harold Stone was shaded by a dogwood tree in full bloom, pink petals drifting like confetti on the wind. I sat on the bench beside him and whispered all the things I couldn't tell anyone else. You wouldn't believe what our boy did, I said. But I think you would have seen it coming. You always said he had your fire and my pride. That's a dangerous mix. The wind stirred gently, like it was listening. I told Harold about the rehab, the court, the cottage, the cedar chest. About how I held on not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because some part of me refused to believe this was how the story would end. When I left, I noticed something odd at the gate. A blue sedan, parked just down the road. The engine off. Windows cracked. Inside, David. He didn't see me. He was just sitting there, hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His shoulders were hunched, his jaw tight. For a long moment, I stood in the shade of the gate's archway and watched him. I wondered what he was thinking. If he had come to visit Harold, or just to wrestle with his own ghosts. I didn't approach. Not yet. Instead, I walked back to the bus stop, heart pounding, unsure if I was proud or just tired. That night, I wrote another letter. This one shorter. David, I saw you at the cemetery today. I didn't stop. I didn't interrupt. I figured if you had something to say, you'd come find me. I'm still here. Mom. This time I mailed it. I didn't know what I expected, if anything. Maybe it was just enough to know he was haunted. Maybe grief was finally catching up to him, or guilt, or the weight of everything he'd tried to bury under dollar signs. Whatever it was his to carry now. Mine was lighter these days, because I'd given my pain a name, a face, a place on a page, and then let it go. The knock came on a rainy Tuesday. I had just set a kettle on the stove, the kind of quiet ritual that makes a home feel like yours, even when the walls still smell like someone else's paint. It was a soft knock, hesitant. I opened the door expecting a neighbor or a delivery, anything but what I saw. David. He looked older than I remembered. Maybe it was the guilt, or maybe I just hadn't seen him clearly in years. His eyes were sunken, his frame thinner. He held his hands in front of him like they didn't know where to go. Hi, Mom. I didn't answer. I just stepped aside. He walked in slowly, scanning the room like he couldn't believe where I was living. His eyes settled on the cedar chest in the corner, the wedding photo on the shelf, the small, tidy couch with the throw blanket I'd crocheted the winter before Harold died. He sat down on the edge of the armchair, my armchair, the one piece he hadn't sold. I got your letter, he said. Both of them. Still, I said nothing. I poured tea into 2 chip mugs and handed him one. He stared into the cup like it might reveal an answer. I messed up, he said finally. I thought you weren't coming back. And then, I don't know. I panicked. The bills, your house, it was all so much. I didn't want to lose everything, so I made choices. You didn't lose everything, I said quietly. You gave it away. He flinched just slightly, but it was the truth. I thought I was protecting myself, he murmured. But I wasn't protecting you. No, I agreed. You weren't. The silence between us stretched, not like a wall this time, but a bridge we weren't sure how to walk. I saw Dad, he said. At the cemetery. I didn't know you'd be there. I nodded. He would have been ashamed of you. David looked down. I know. The rain tapped against the window, steady and soft. Why now? I asked. Why come here today? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice cracked. Because I realized the worst thing I did wasn't selling the house. It was forgetting what that house meant. I forgot who you were. I looked at him long and hard. My son. My betrayer. My blood. You forgot, I said, because you stopped looking. He nodded, swallowed hard. Can I make it right? No, I said. You can't undo what you did, but you can start showing up. If you want to be in my life, you earn your place, David. One day at a time. I want to try, he whispered. Then start with this tea, I said, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't expected. Remorse, and maybe, just maybe, hope. The days that followed David's visit were quiet, but the air felt different. Less like winter and more like the first warm breeze after a long freeze. He didn't come every day, and I didn't expect him to. But he showed up once a week with groceries or flowers, always in that same apologetic silence. I didn't make it easy. I didn't rush to forgive. Some days I barely spoke, just let him sit in the old armchair while I sipped my tea and read. And other days I asked questions. Hard ones. Why didn't you tell me you were drowning? I thought you'd be disappointed. He never argued. He took it like someone who knew the damage had already been done and was trying to repair the structure, brick by painstaking brick. One Sunday, he brought over a photo album. Not the one he sold, he couldn't undo that, but a new one. He had printed pictures from old backups he found on my computer, scanned what few he had saved. This was our trip to the mountains, he said, pointing. Remember the raccoon that stole your sandwich? I did. And for the first time in years, I laughed, really laughed, belly deep and unexpected. After that, it got easier. I introduced him to Marisol, my student at the community center. He offered to help paint the walls of the new classroom. Then, he volunteered to drive a few of the ladies to their sessions when the bus routes got cut. He wasn't just rebuilding with me. He was rebuilding himself. And little by little, I let myself believe maybe he wasn't lost for good. That maybe grief and guilt had warped him into someone I didn't recognize, but under it all, the boy I raised was still in there. Not the same, but maybe better for having broken. One afternoon, I showed him the cedar chest. Everything in here is what you didn't touch, I told him. He looked through it slowly, hands trembling at every item. The Mother's Day card, the letter from Harold, the baby sock I had kept all these years. I should have known, he said. You didn't want to know, I corrected. There's a difference. He nodded. Can I help preserve it now? That was the first real apology. Not in words, but in action. And I accepted it not all at once, but in pieces, the same way trust is built after a storm. Spring arrived like an apology that had taken too long to say. The tulips outside my cottage cracked through the dirt as if they decided to bloom out of spite, and I understood that better than I ever had before. Spite could carry you just as far as hope, sometimes further. I just sat down with a cup of chamomile tea when there was a knock at the door. David. He was holding a small, unmarked wooden box. I looked at his face, less weary than before, but not young anymore. Regret had a way of aging a person from the inside out. He didn't speak right away, just held it out like an offering. What's this? I asked. Something I want you to have, he said. You don't have to accept it, but I hope you do. I opened the box. Inside was a single silver key on a blue ribbon and a folded note. Mom, I bought a place. It's not big, just a little bungalow south of town. Need some love like we all do. There's a garden in the back. I planted tulips. They're crooked, but they're growing. I'd like you to see it. Maybe help me make it feel like home. I stared at the key. This wasn't a bribe. It wasn't about undoing the past. There was no pretending he hadn't betrayed me. But something had changed in him, something small but real. That Saturday I got in his car. It was cleaner than I remembered. He'd even fixed the rattle in the glove box, which used to drive me nuts. The ride was quiet but not tense. Just careful. The house was plain. Beige siding, a mailbox leaning slightly. But it had good bones, as Harold used to say. And sure enough, the tulips were blooming in a crooked little line near the porch, like children standing out of step at a school recital. I laughed. They're terrible, I said, pointing. They're mine, he replied. I wanted to do something right, even if it's ugly. Inside, it smelled like paint and fresh bread. He held up a familiar recipe card. My handwriting yellowed with time. Banana bread, he said. It's probably awful. It was, dense and overly spiced. but I ate it anyway. After the tour, 3 rooms, 1 bath, tiny backyard, I sat on the porch while he brought out tea. I'm not asking you to move in, he said, carefully. I know better than that. I just want you to know I'm thinking about you. When I put a nail in the wall, when I choose a rug, you're part of the foundation. He looked away then, as if afraid I might laugh. But I didn't. Instead, I said, that's a good start. We fell into a new rhythm after that. Friday dinners, sometimes at his house, sometimes mine. He brought over groceries, helped fix the leaky faucet in my bathroom. I taught him how to cook chicken without drying it out. He taught me how to stream movies on my laptop. We didn't talk about the past every time, but sometimes when it was quiet and the dishes were done, he'd bring up the things he'd sold. A lamp, my wedding china, the music box from my bedroom. I think about them, he admitted once. I wish I had known what they really meant. You didn't ask, I said. You assumed. I did, and we left it there. One evening, while sorting old papers, I came across the original letter I had written him from rehab, the one I never sent. I unfolded it, read it again, and then quietly fed it to the fireplace. Not because I didn't mean it anymore, but because I had already lived its message. The fire crackled, and I felt no sorrow, just closure. My life was no longer anchored to the things he took. It was anchored to what I had reclaimed. My dignity, my voice, my future. David would never be the son I imagined, but he was trying to be the man he should have been. And that, like the crooked tulips, was messy, imperfect, and quietly beautiful. As I locked my cottage door that night and turned off the porch light, I held that silver key in my hand. Not a symbol of the past, but a promise to myself. No one would ever hold the keys to my life again, unless I gave them willingly.